Get on the ground. Now! He pressed a knee into the surgeon's back, hospital badge cracking against the wet asphalt 4 minutes before the OR flatlined. Phones up. No one moved. One officer smiled. No one knew the woman bleeding out on that table was the chief's wife, and her only surgeon was in handcuffs. The rain came down hard, not the kind that passes, the kind that soaks through everything and stays. The streetlights turned the puddles red and blue, over and over, like a pulse that wouldn't stop. Elijah Reed had been driving for 11 minutes. 11 minutes since the call came through. A woman on the table. Pressure dropping. The OR team waiting on him specifically. He was 2 blocks from the hospital when the lights appeared in his mirror. He pulled over. He always pulled over. The officer took his time. Elijah watched him in the side mirror, one hand resting on the door of the cruiser. No urgency. No movement. Just standing there in the rain like he had all night, like the world would wait for him. Elijah lowered his window. He kept both hands visible on the wheel. License and registration. The voice was flat, practiced, the kind of flat that wasn't neutral. It was a choice. Officer, I need you to know I'm a trauma surgeon. I have a patient in critical condition 2 blocks from here. Elijah spoke slowly, clearly, the way he'd learned to speak in rooms where people didn't want to hear him. The officer looked at him, then looked at the car, a dark Mercedes, still clean despite the rain. His jaw shifted slightly. License and registration. Elijah reached for the glove compartment, carefully, both hands visible the entire time. He handed over the documents. His hospital badge was clipped to his jacket, catching the blue light every few seconds. The officer didn't look at it. He walked back to the cruiser. Slow, deliberate. Elijah checked the clock on the dashboard, then checked his phone. A text from Rosa, his OR nurse. Where are you? She's crashing. He typed back, stopped, coming. 4 minutes passed, then 5. The rain kept falling. When the officer came back, he wasn't alone. A second cruiser had pulled up behind the first, its lights joining the rhythm. A second officer stepped out. Younger, hand already near his belt. Step out of the vehicle. Elijah didn't move for a moment, not out of defiance, out of calculation. He understood exactly what was happening, and he understood that his next move mattered more than any of the moves that came before it. He stepped out slowly, hands up, badge visible. I'm Dr. Elijah Reed, Chief of Trauma Surgery at Mercy General. I have a patient. Turn around. Sir, if you'll just look at my... The push came fast, one hand on his shoulder, one on the back of his neck. The wet asphalt came up to meet him before he could process it. His shoulder hit first, then his cheek. The cold went through him like a current. His phone skidded out of his pocket and landed face up in a shallow puddle, screen still lit. A voice was coming from it, thin and distant, like something from another world. Dr. Reed, are you there? She's at 70 over 40. We need you now. Nobody picked it up. The first officer put a knee into the center of his back. Not full weight, just enough. A message without words. Elijah pressed his cheek against the ground and breathed. Slow, even. He did not struggle. He did not raise his voice. He had learned, a long time ago, that anger in a moment like this was a luxury he could not afford. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. 3 people. Then 5. Phones up, screens glowing in the rain. Nobody spoke. Nobody stepped forward. One woman in a yellow raincoat watched with her hand over her mouth. A man in a delivery uniform looked once, then looked away. Someone laughed, low, from near the second cruiser. Elijah couldn't see who. His badge had fallen off during the struggle. It lay on the wet pavement 3 feet away, face up, his name and title printed clearly beneath the hospital seal. The laminate was catching the light. Elijah Reed, M.D., Department of Trauma Surgery. The younger officer glanced at it. Just for a second. Something crossed his face. Not quite recognition, not quite doubt. Something smaller than that. A question he hadn't asked yet. He looked at Elijah on the ground, then back at the badge, then at his partner. His partner wasn't looking at any of it. The phone in the puddle had gone quiet. The screen was still on. And somewhere 2 blocks away, in a room full of people who knew exactly who Elijah Reed was, a monitor was screaming, and no one was answering it. The officer standing over him didn't move. He just looked down. The way a man looks at something on the ground that doesn't concern him. His hand rested near his holster. Not gripping it, just resting. The way a reminder doesn't need to be spoken out loud. His name tag said Briggs. He was maybe 40. Built like someone who had never been told no in a professional setting. His boots were planted wide apart in the puddle, and the rain ran off the brim of his hat in a steady stream, and none of it seemed to bother him at all. "You got anything else in the vehicle?" Briggs didn't look at Elijah when he asked. He was scanning the Mercedes, moving his flashlight slowly across the interior through the open door. The leather seats, the console, the medical bag on the passenger floor. Elijah spoke from the ground. "I have surgical equipment. In the bag, I'm a surgeon." Briggs moved the flashlight to the bag. Didn't touch it, didn't ask about it, just looked at it the way he'd looked at everything else, as an object in a space he controlled. "Stay down." The younger officer, Dalton, according to his tag, had moved to the sidewalk side. He was holding Elijah's license and the registration card, looking at them in the rain. His posture was different from Briggs. Tighter. Like someone aware that something didn't quite fit but not yet sure what to do with that feeling. 4 people were filming now. A teenager with her phone held high. An older man recording from beneath a bus shelter. 2 women across the street. Close together. Neither of them speaking. Their screens were small white lights in the dark, and they watched through them the way people watch things they know are wrong but don't know how to stop. Briggs walked back to where Elijah was on the ground. He crouched down. Not to help. To look more closely at something that had caught his attention, or maybe to make a point about proximity, about who was lower and who was higher in this particular moment. "You were doing 47 in a 35. His voice was the same flat tone as before, calm in the way that has nothing to do with peace. "I was responding to a surgical emergency." Elijah kept his voice even. He had performed surgery on people who were dying. He understood controlled breathing. "There is a patient at Mercy General right now who will not survive without... You got a suspended plate on this vehicle. You know that..." Elijah stopped. "That's not possible. Computer says what it says." There was a pause. Rain on pavement. A car passing slowly on the far side of the street. Slowing down. Then moving on. Briggs stood back up. He looked at Dalton and gave a small nod. The kind that doesn't need words because the 2 people involved have had the same conversation enough times that the nod is the conversation. Dalton looked down at the license again. He looked at the hospital badge still lying in the puddle. He didn't say anything. Briggs pulled out a citation pad. He wrote slowly, deliberately, each motion carrying the full weight of institutional authority, the authority that doesn't require justification because it is itself the justification. The badge on his chest was not a symbol in this moment. It was a mechanism. It was the reason nothing Elijah said would be processed as truth until Briggs decided it was. I'm going to need you to sit up against the vehicle." Elijah sat up. His shoulder ached deeply. His jacket was soaked through and his cheek was scraped from the pavement, a thin line of heat across the bone. He moved carefully, keeping his hands visible, placing his back against the rear tire of his own car. The position was designed to be uncomfortable. The position was designed to communicate something specific about who had power in this space and who did not. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. 7 people now. Maybe 8. One of them had started a live stream, the small red dot visible on her screen. Still no one spoke directly to the officers. Still no one stepped off the curb. The system on display was not just the 2 men in uniform. It was also the silence. It was also the distance everyone else maintained, the invisible line between witness and participant that almost no one in a moment like this is willing to cross. Briggs finished writing. He tore the citation from the pad. The sound was small and sharp in the rain. He held it out toward Elijah without looking at him. The way you hold something out when you've already decided the other person has no relevant response left to give. Elijah took it. His hand was steady, but his phone was still face up in the puddle, still lit. And the last message on the screen, visible from where he sat, read BP60/40. "Elijah, please. We're losing her." Elijah didn't move more than he had to. He sat against the rear tire, with his hands resting open on his knees. Palms up, the universal posture of someone who has decided not to be a threat. The rain kept falling. He let it. Briggs was on his radio now, standing a few feet away, speaking low. Dalton had moved back to the sidewalk. He was looking at his phone, or pretending to. The citation was still in Elijah's hand, soaking through, the ink beginning to blur at the edges. Elijah read it once. Then he set it down on his knee and looked straight ahead. "You can stand up." Briggs said it without turning around, like an afterthought, like standing up was something being granted rather than something that had been taken. Elijah stood slowly, not because he was weak, because he was deliberate. He straightened his jacket, one button at a time. He picked up the citation and folded it once and placed it in his inside pocket. Every movement was quiet and complete. Nothing rushed, nothing performed. Briggs turned to look at him. Something shifted in his expression. Just slightly. He had expected something different. Anger, maybe. Argument. A raised voice he could respond to. What he was getting instead was a man who moved like he had all the time in the world, which was exactly the opposite of how someone in this position was supposed to behave. "You have a problem with the citation. You can contest it in court." "I understand," Elijah said. Briggs waited. Elijah didn't add anything. "You want to tell me why you were driving that fast?" "I already told you." Elijah's voice was the same as it had been since the beginning. Level, not cold, not warm. The voice of someone who has learned that tone is the only thing he fully controls in a moment like this. "I have a patient in critical condition at Mercy General, 2 blocks from here. I've been stopped for—" He glanced at his watch, a small, precise motion. 19 minutes. Briggs looked at the watch. A simple thing. Nothing expensive. Then he looked at the badge on the ground, still lying in the puddle where it had fallen during the takedown. He hadn't picked it up. Neither had Dalton. It had been sitting there this entire time, face up, name and title fully visible, getting rained on. Dalton was watching now, not filming, not writing, just watching. His arms were crossed, and his weight had shifted to one foot, the posture of someone whose certainty has developed a small crack and doesn't yet know what to do about it. "You got someone who can verify that?" Briggs asked. The question was meant to sound routine. It didn't quite land that way. "Call Mercy, General. Ask for the OR. Ask for Rosa Mendez." Elijah said the name clearly. Precisely. The way he said names in the operating room when he needed to make sure everyone in the room heard exactly what he was asking for. Briggs didn't move toward his radio. He looked at Elijah for a long moment. The rain filled the silence between them. One of the people on the sidewalk lowered her phone. Not all the way. Just a few inches. She was middle-aged, a grocery bag in her other hand, and she had been recording since the beginning. But something about the last 60 seconds had made her uncertain about what exactly she was watching. It showed on her face. The slight furrow, the way her eyes moved from Briggs to Elijah and back again, recalibrating. Elijah looked at Briggs and waited. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the phones. He did not look at the badge on the ground, though he was aware of exactly where it was. He had been aware of it the entire time. Briggs finally reached for his radio. Low voice. A name. A request for verification. He turned slightly away while he spoke. The way people turn when they're not sure what they're about to hear. Elijah stood in the rain. His shoulder was throbbing now, a deep and rhythmic ache that he had been cataloging quietly since the fall. The way he cataloged pain in patients, noting it, filing it, setting it aside for later. His cheek was still bleeding slightly. A thin line, barely enough to notice unless you were looking. Dalton was looking. He hadn't said a word in 4 minutes. He stood on the edge of the sidewalk with his arms still crossed and his eyes moving in a way that suggested the question forming behind them was getting harder to ignore. He looked at the badge in the puddle again, then at Elijah's face, then at the badge. Then he did something small. So small that Briggs, still on the radio with his back partly turned, didn't notice it. Dalton stepped off the curb. He walked the 3 feet to where the badge was lying. He crouched down. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hand, reading it carefully, the way you read something when you already suspect what it says but need to see it confirmed in writing. He didn't say anything. He just held it. And for the first time since the lights appeared in Elijah's mirror, someone in a position of authority was holding the truth and hadn't yet decided what to do with it. Dalton turned the badge over one more time. The laminate was wet, but the printing underneath was clean. The kind of printing that came from an institutional ID system, not something made at a copy shop. There was a barcode along the bottom edge, a department seal in the upper left corner, a photo of Elijah that matched the man standing 3 feet away from him exactly. He read the title again. Chief of Trauma Surgery. Not staff surgeon, not resident. Chief. Briggs was still on the radio, his voice too low to make out full sentences. The rain had eased slightly, just enough that the street felt quieter than before. The kind of quiet that makes small sounds carry further. Dalton could hear his own breathing. He could hear the water moving along the gutter. He could hear the faint sound still coming from Elijah's phone, which was still in the puddle, still lit, though the screen had dimmed now to half brightness. Dalton walked to the phone. He picked it up. He looked at the screen without meaning to. The way you look at something before you've decided whether you should. The message thread was open. 7 messages from a contact saved as Rosa Orr. The last 4 were unread. The timestamps were spaced less than 2 minutes apart. He didn't read them out loud. He just held the phone the same way he was holding the badge, one object in each hand, and stood very still. Elijah watched him. He didn't say anything. He had learned that there were moments when silence was more persuasive than any argument, moments when you let the evidence speak and you simply stayed out of its way. This was one of those moments. Across town, In the scrub room outside OR3, Rosa Mendez had stopped waiting. She had been calling the main dispatch line for 11 minutes, working her way up through operators, holding through transfers, being told to wait, being told the system was processing, being told someone would follow up. She had set down the phone once, walked back to the OR door, looked through the small window at the team inside, at the monitors, at the attending who was doing what he could but was not Elijah. And then she had walked back and picked up the phone again. This time she asked for a supervisor. She used the words surgical emergency and critical patient and chief of trauma surgery in the same sentence, speaking the way Elijah had taught the whole team to speak when something needed to happen immediately, clearly, without room for misinterpretation. She gave the badge number from memory. She gave the plate number of his car from the board in the surgery wing where it was listed for parking records. She gave the exact intersection where he had last texted from. The supervisor on the line went quiet for a moment. Then she heard the sound of keys on a keyboard. Then another pause. Back on the street, Briggs ended his radio call. He turned around and looked at Dalton, who was still standing with the badge in one hand and the phone in the other. Briggs took that in without expression. He walked over slowly. "What are you doing?" Dalton held up the badge. He didn't explain. He just held it at an angle so Briggs could read it without stepping closer. Briggs looked at it. His jaw moved slightly, the same small shift as before, but this time it stayed shifted. He didn't look away from the badge the way he had been looking away from it all night. The woman with the grocery bag on the sidewalk had lowered her phone completely now. She was watching with both eyes. No screen between her and what was happening. Two of the other bystanders had moved closer to the curb without quite stepping off it, drawn forward by something they couldn't have named, the instinct that senses when the atmosphere of a situation is about to change. Briggs looked from the badge to Elijah. Something in his posture recalibrated. Not an apology. Not even close to that. But the absolute certainty that had been in his body since the moment he stepped out of the cruiser was no longer absolute. It had developed the same small crack that Dalton had been carrying for the last several minutes. And cracks, once they appear, do not close on their own. His radio crackled. A different voice this time. Not dispatch. A supervisor channel. 3 words came through clearly before he reached to turn down the volume, but not before Dalton heard them, and not before Elijah heard them. "Verify the surgeon." Briggs turned the volume back up slowly, the kind of slow that happens when a person needs a second to decide whether they want to hear what's coming. The radio crackled again, the same supervisor channel, and this time the voice was clearer, more deliberate, the voice of someone reading directly from a file. "Read, Elijah D., Chief of Trauma Surgery, Mercy General Hospital, badge number 4471, 15 years on staff, currently listed as responding to an active surgical emergency. Time sensitive." No one spoke. The rain had pulled back to a fine mist now, and the street felt strangely exposed without the noise of it. Briggs was looking at his radio. Dalton was looking at Briggs. Elijah was looking at neither of them. He was looking at his phone, which Dalton was still holding, watching the screen the way you watch something you are calculating the distance to. Briggs pressed the call button. "Can you confirm the patient status at Mercy General OR3? A pause. Longer than it should have been. Then the supervisor's voice came back. And something in the texture of it had changed, a tightness that hadn't been there before. The sound of someone who has just read something on their own screen that has changed the nature of the conversation entirely. The patient is listed as Evelyn Vance, admitted 9:47 p.m., trauma case, next of kin has been notified. Another pause. Next of kin is listed as Chief Gerald Vance. The name landed without drama. That was the strange thing about it. There was no thunderclap, no shift in the light. Just a name coming through a radio on a wet street. 4 words that rearranged everything without raising their voice. Dalton's head turned toward Briggs, slowly. The way you turn when you want to see someone's face but don't want them to know you're looking. Briggs had gone very still. His hand was still on the radio, but he wasn't pressing anything. He was standing the way people stand when their body has received information that their mind is still processing. Weight distributed evenly. No lean in any direction. A temporary stillness that is not calm. Elijah took 1 step forward, not toward Briggs. Toward his car. Toward the hospital 2 blocks away. It was a small step, barely a movement at all, but it was the first time in 26 minutes that he had moved toward something rather than being moved. Briggs didn't stop him. That was the moment. Not the name on the radio, not the badge in Dalton's hand. The moment was Briggs not stopping him, because Briggs had been stopping him, explicitly and physically, for the last 26 minutes. And now he wasn't. And the absence of that action said more than any word either of them had spoken. The woman with the grocery bag on the sidewalk had her phone back up. She wasn't moving it the way people move phones when they're recording something exciting. She was holding it steady. Very still. The way you hold something when you understand that what you're watching is no longer just an incident. Dalton walked to Elijah and held out the phone. He held out the badge at the same time, both objects, extended together, with both hands. He didn't say anything. There was nothing that fit. Every phrase that existed for this moment was either too small or too late. And Dalton seemed to understand that, because he just held out the 2 things and waited. Elijah took them. He clipped the badge back onto his jacket. The small click of it snapping into place was the only sound on the street for a full second. He looked at the phone. 4 missed calls from Rosa. A voicemail. The battery at 11%. He looked up at Briggs one time. Not with anger. Not with the satisfaction of a man who has been proven right. Though he had been proven right. Completely and in front of witnesses. He looked at him the way you look at something you are filing away carefully. The way you look at something you will need to remember exactly as it was. Not as it will later be described. Then he turned towards the hospital and walked. Not running. Walking. The steady, purposeful walk of a man who has somewhere to be, and has always had somewhere to be, and has known it every minute of the last 26 minutes. Behind him. Briggs hadn't moved. The radio was quiet. The street was quiet, and the name Evelyn Vance was still hanging in the air between all of them, settling slowly the way things settle when no one is ready to touch them yet. Briggs watched Elijah walk away for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned to Dalton and said, quietly, "The way you say things you don't want recorded. Write it up as a routine stop. Failure to yield. Uncooperative driver." Dalton looked at him. He didn't write anything down. He just looked. "Write it up," Briggs said again. Same volume, same tone. The tone of someone who is not asking. Dalton took out his notepad. He held the pen above the paper. He didn't move it. The radio crackled again. A different channel this time. And both of them recognized the call sign. Precinct Commander. Briggs answered it before the second crackle finished. He walked 6 steps away from Dalton before he started talking, which told Dalton everything about what the conversation was going to contain. Inside the second cruiser, the officer who had laughed earlier, whose name was Ferris, was already on his personal phone. He wasn't calling dispatch. The number he dialed rang twice before someone picked up, and the conversation lasted less than 90 seconds. And when it was done, Ferris sat for a moment looking at the windshield, then opened his door and stepped back out into the mist. He walked to Briggs. He waited for the radio call to end. When Briggs lowered the radio, Ferris leaned in close and said 2 words. Briggs nodded once. Whatever the 2 words were, they changed the geometry of his posture, straightened something that had been uncertain, gave the blankness in his face a different quality. Not confidence exactly, more like a decision made. Across town, in an office on the 4th floor of the Central Precinct building, a lieutenant named Carver was reading a text on his personal phone at 10:23 p.m. on a Wednesday. He read it twice. Then he set the phone face down on his desk and sat for a moment with his hands flat on the surface in front of him. Then he picked up his desk phone and made a call that did not go through the main switchboard. The call lasted 4 minutes. He spoke for most of it. When he hung up, he opened his laptop and navigated to the incident reporting portal and looked at the fields that had not yet been filled in for a stop logged at 10:04 p.m. on Meridian Avenue. He did not fill them in. He just looked at them. Then he closed the laptop and stood up and put on his jacket and left the office. The woman with the grocery bag had posted her video by the time Elijah reached the hospital entrance. She hadn't planned to. She had started to put her phone away and then looked at the footage again. At the moment, Briggs pressed his knee into the center of a man's back, while a phone in a puddle 3 feet away played a voice saying, "We're losing her," and she had posted it without a caption because she couldn't think of one that was adequate. Within 8 minutes it had been viewed 400 times. Within 20 it was over 3,000. She didn't know any of the names involved. She didn't know about Evelyn Vance. She just knew what she had seen, and that it had felt important in the way that certain things feel important before you can explain why. Back on Meridian Avenue, Dalton was still standing with his pen above his notepad. Briggs had come back from his call and was standing close, not threatening, just close. The physical language of expectation. The notepad was still blank. The pen was still not moving. "I need you to write it up," Briggs said, a 3rd time. But something had changed in the delivery. There was a layer beneath the flatness now. Something that understood the footage existed and was already calculating what a written report needed to say in order to survive contact with it. Dalton wrote the time and the location. He wrote the plate number. He stopped there. "Keep going," Briggs said. Dalton looked at what he'd written. 2 lines. A time, a place, a number. The minimum architecture of a report with nothing yet inside it. He thought about the badge in his hand 20 minutes ago. He thought about the name on the radio. He thought about the phone in the puddle and the voice coming out of it, and the fact that he had heard it clearly, and so had Briggs and so had Ferris, and no one had picked it up. He kept the pen where it was. Briggs made a sound that was almost nothing. A breath, or something just past a breath. Then he took out his own notepad and began writing, and the scratch of his pen on paper was the only sound between them, and it was the sound of a story being written by the person with the most to lose from the true one. Elijah walked through the emergency entrance at 10:31 p.m. His jacket was soaked through. His left shoulder was locked up tight. The deep muscle kind of injury that doesn't announce itself fully until the adrenaline is gone. His cheek had dried into a thin, dark line along the bone. He didn't stop at the desk. He didn't sign in. He walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for the 3rd floor and stood with his back against the wall of the elevator car and closed his eyes for the 11 seconds it took to reach the OR level. Rosa was waiting at the scrub room door. She took one look at him, and her expression moved through 3 things in rapid succession. Relief, then shock, then a focused professional stillness that both of them recognized as the mode you switch into when there is no time for anything else. She didn't ask what happened. She turned and pushed through the scrub room door, and he followed her. Left shoulder, he said, while the water ran over his hands. How bad? I can work. She looked at him. He looked at the wall above the sink. That was the end of the conversation about his shoulder. In the OR, the attending who had been managing in his absence stepped back without a word when Elijah entered. The handoff took 40 seconds. Elijah moved to the table and looked at the monitors and looked at the patient and said 3 words to the anesthesiologist, and then his hands were where they needed to be, and the room restructured itself around him the way rooms do when the right person finally arrives. Outside the OR, Rosa sat down in the hallway and picked up her phone. Her hands were shaking slightly. She had been in that scrub room for 31 minutes, calling every number she could find while a woman's blood pressure dropped, and the surgeon who could fix it was on the ground 2 blocks away with his face against the pavement. She pulled up the video that had already reached her through 2 separate people in the last 15 minutes and watched it once, all the way through, without stopping. Then she forwarded it to 7 people. By 10:45 p.m., the video had been seen by everyone on the 3rd floor who wasn't actively in surgery. A nurse named Marcus watched it in the break room and said nothing for a long time, and then called his brother. A resident named Park forwarded it to a group thread of 32 medical school classmates with a single line of text that said only, "This is the chief of trauma at my hospital tonight." An attending named Dr. Flores, who had worked with Elijah for 9 years, watched it twice, and then walked to the window at the end of the corridor and stood there for a while, looking at the parking lot. The video kept moving. It crossed out of the hospital and into the city the way water moves through a system, finding every available channel. A community board reposted it. A local news producer saw it on the board at 11:02 p.m. and forwarded it to her editor. A man in a barbershop 2 miles from Mercy General watched it on someone else's phone and said he had a story exactly like this. Almost exactly, down to the street. People began responding in the comments not with outrage, but with recognition. The particular recognition of people who have experienced a version of the same thing and have been waiting without knowing they were waiting for someone else to name it. At 11:17 p.m., a journalist named Lena Carr, who covered city accountability for a mid-sized independent outlet, received the video from 3 different sources within 4 minutes. She watched it on her laptop with the volume up. She paused it at the moment Briggs pressed his knee into Elijah's back. She looked at the timestamp in the corner of the frame. She looked at the hospital 2 blocks away, visible in the background, its emergency sign lit red against the dark. Then she opened a new document and typed the date and the intersection and the name from the badge, which was clearly visible in the footage for anyone who paused at the right moment. She typed Chief of Trauma Surgery and stopped and looked at it. Then she picked up her phone and called a source at the precinct she had been cultivating for 2 years and had never used for anything this direct. The phone rang 4 times. When he picked up, she said only, "The stop on Meridian tonight. I need everything." There was a silence on the other end, long enough to confirm that he already knew what she was talking about, long enough to confirm that the story had already reached places that were trying to decide what to do with it. That silence was the point of no return. Not the video, not the name on the radio. The silence of a man inside the system who already knew and was deciding whether to talk. Once that silence existed, the story could no longer be contained by the people who needed to contain it. It could only be managed, delayed, or shaped, and even that window was closing fast. Lena Carr worked the way she always worked, from the edges inward. She didn't start with the big question. She started with the small ones, the ones that had specific answers that could be verified or couldn't. The first thing she did was timestamp the original video. The woman who posted it had location services enabled, which meant the metadata attached to the file included the exact time the recording began, 10:06 p.m. She cross-referenced that against the incident log from the precinct, which a contact had photographed and sent to her at 11:44 p.m. The stop was logged at 10:04 p.m. That was consistent, but the log listed the duration of the stop as 11 minutes. Elijah had walked into the hospital at 10:31 p.m., which she confirmed through the emergency entrance security footage timestamp that a source inside the hospital provided by midnight. 11 minutes and 27 minutes were not the same number. She wrote both numbers at the top of her document and underlined them and moved on. The original video ran 4 minutes and 12 seconds. It began mid-incident, after Elijah was already on the ground. It ended when the woman who filmed it lowered her phone to move away from the scene. Those 4 minutes were not in question. What was in question was everything before them. The log said the stop began at 10:04. The video began at 10:06. 2 minutes were unaccounted for on film. 2 minutes in which Elijah had been pulled from his vehicle, pushed to the ground, and had his badge knocked loose, none of which appeared in the footage that had been circulating. She made a note. 2 minutes. Pre-footage. Unwitnessed on current record. By 1 a.m., she had identified 7 people who had been present on Meridian Avenue during the stop based on social media posts, comments on the original video, and 2 direct messages from people who had seen her name attached to early coverage and reached out. She contacted all 7. 4 didn't respond. 1 responded to say they hadn't filmed anything. 1 sent her a 30-second clip that showed the tail end of the incident. Nothing new. The 7th responded at 1:23 a.m. with a message that was only 6 words long. I have the whole thing. Unedited. His name was Thomas Wyatt. He was 53 years old and had been walking home from a late shift at a printing company on Meridian Avenue when the cruiser lights caught his attention. He had started filming from across the street before the first officer had even fully exited his vehicle. He had filmed continuously for 29 minutes, including the moment Briggs grabbed the door handle of Elijah's car, the moment he pulled it open without waiting for Elijah to open it himself, the push, the fall, the knee, the phone in the puddle, the voice from the phone, and the citation being written while that voice continued. He had not posted it. He had gone home and put his phone on his kitchen table and sat across from it for 2 hours trying to decide what doing the right thing would cost him and whether he could afford it. When he saw Lena's name, he recognized it from a piece she had written 3 years earlier about a different incident in a different precinct, a piece that had been accurate and had not named its sources. That was the thing that made him send the 6 words. They met at a 24-hour diner on Clement Street at 2:15 a.m. He handed her his phone across a table with 2 untouched cups of coffee between them. She watched the footage from the beginning without stopping. 29 minutes of unbroken recording, shot from across the street at a slight angle that captured both officers and Elijah's vehicle with reasonable clarity throughout. At the 1:44 mark of the footage, she saw Briggs reach for the door handle of the Mercedes before Elijah had lowered his window more than 2 inches. She paused it there. The frame showed his hand on the handle, his body positioned in a way that was not consistent with a standard traffic stop posture. Too close, too fast. The posture of a conclusion already reached before the encounter had properly begun. She forwarded the file to her encrypted drive and handed the phone back to Thomas. She asked him if he was willing to be a named source. He looked at his coffee. He looked at his phone. He said he needed to think about it. She said she understood, and gave him her card and told him to call her by 8 a.m. either way. Walking back to her car, she opened her document and looked at the 2 numbers at the top. 11 minutes and 27 minutes. Then she added a third line beneath them. Door handle at 144, pre-compliance contact, unambiguous on film. She didn't write anything else. She didn't need to. The 3 lines together said the thing that no single line could say alone, and she had learned long ago that the moment you stop letting evidence speak for itself is the moment you stop being a journalist and start being something else. She got in her car and sat in the dark for a moment. Then she called her editor. It was 2:48 a.m. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he already understood what kind of story this was becoming. "I have the unedited footage," she said. He didn't ask how long it was or what was on it. He asked one question. "Is it unambiguous?" She thought about the door handle at 144. She thought about the hand on the handle before the window was down. She thought about the voice in the puddle that no one picked up. "Yes," she said. The statement from the precinct went out at 7:15 a.m. It was 4 paragraphs long and had been written by someone who understood precisely how language could be arranged to suggest things without asserting them. The first paragraph described a routine traffic stop, initiated due to a vehicle traveling 12 miles over the posted speed limit. The second paragraph noted that the driver had been uncooperative and had made repeated claims that officers found inconsistent with available information at the time. The third paragraph stated that officers had followed standard protocol throughout the encounter and that the matter had been resolved appropriately. The fourth paragraph said the department took all community concerns seriously and that an internal review would be conducted according to established procedures. The word surgeon did not appear anywhere in the statement. Neither did the word handcuffs. Neither did the phrase 27 minutes. By 8 a.m., 3 television stations had run the statement alongside the 4-minute video that had been circulating since the night before. 2 of them used the phrase uncooperative driver in their on-screen text, which was taken directly from the precinct statement and presented without attribution, as though it were a neutral description rather than one side's characterization. One anchor used the phrase alleged surgeon in her intro, and the word alleged sat in front of his title for 11 seconds before the segment moved on. Lena watched the morning coverage from her desk and wrote down the word alleged in her notebook and circled it twice. At 8:45 a.m., Elijah's phone showed a voicemail from the hospital's legal department. He listened to it once, standing in the hospital parking lot, still in the same clothes from the night before. His surgical gown traded back for a jacket that was now dry, but had stiffened in the shape of everything that had happened to it. The voicemail was from a woman named Patricia Cho, who identified herself as Associate General Counsel and asked him to come in for a meeting before his next scheduled shift. Her voice was careful and even, and gave nothing away, which itself gave something away. He called her back immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "We need to discuss the events of last night," she said, "and their potential impact on your standing here." "My standing," he said. "There are questions being raised about your judgment, driving at that speed, the circumstances of the stop." A pause. "And there are questions about your physical condition, whether you're fit to operate given the reported injury to your shoulder." Elijah stood in the parking lot and looked at the hospital entrance, the same entrance he had walked through 7 hours earlier, soaking wet with his shoulder locked and his cheek bleeding, and gone directly to a surgical table where he had worked for 4 hours and done exactly what he had been trying to get there to do all along. He thought about saying that. He decided not to. "I'll be there at 10, he said. His shoulder had worsened overnight. He knew it the moment he woke up, the deep-set ache that had sharpened into something more specific, a structural complaint rather than a general one. He could lift his arm to shoulder height. Beyond that, the pain became a serious consideration. He had not told anyone this except Rosa, and Rosa had not told anyone because he had asked her not to. and she had agreed because she understood what would happen if the information reached the wrong people before he had a chance to control the context around it. It reached the wrong people anyway. At 9:20 a.m., a post appeared on a medical professional forum that Lena found through a tip 40 minutes later. It was written anonymously and described a senior surgeon at an unnamed urban hospital who had performed a complex procedure while impaired by a significant upper body injury sustained during what the post called an altercation with law enforcement. The language was clinical and carefully hedged, but the details were specific enough that anyone familiar with Mercy General's staff would have no difficulty identifying the subject. Lena noted the timestamp, 9:20 a.m. She noted the forum's metadata, which showed the post had been made from an account created the previous month with no prior activity. She noted the phrase altercation with law enforcement, which subtly repositioned the encounter on Meridian Avenue as a mutual conflict rather than a one-sided exercise of force. She added it to her document without comment. By 9:45 a.m. Elijah had received 3 text messages from colleagues who had seen the morning coverage and one from a former mentor who said, "Only call me when you can." He had received nothing from hospital administration except the voicemail from Patricia Cho. He had received nothing from Chief Vance, whose wife was in a recovery room on the 2nd floor, vitals stable, procedure successful, the surgeon who had saved her life standing in a parking lot being asked whether his judgment could be trusted. He put his phone in his pocket and walked into the building. In the lobby, a television mounted above the reception desk was running the morning news. He didn't look at it directly, but he caught the lower third in his peripheral vision as he passed. A text banner moving across the screen in white letters on a dark background. Precinct defends officers in viral stop. Driver's account disputed. He kept walking. His shoulder ached with every step. The elevator took 11 seconds to arrive. He stood in the same position as the night before, back against the wall, eyes forward, and wrote it upward in silence while somewhere above him the building continued to decide what it was going to do about him. The hearing room was not large. 12 rows of public seating, a raised panel of 7 council members along the front wall, a single table facing them where witnesses sat one at a time. The lighting was institutional, the kind that flattens everything and makes shadows impossible. There were no windows. Elijah sat in the 3rd row. He wore a dark suit and his hospital badge clipped to the lapel. The same badge that had spent time in a puddle on Meridian Avenue 9 days earlier. The laminate had a small watermark in the lower left corner that no amount of cleaning had fully removed. He had decided not to replace it. The room was full, standing along the back wall, camera operators from 4 outlets positioned along the side. Lena Carr in the 2nd row with a notebook open and a pen that she hadn't used yet because nothing worth writing down had happened yet. Thomas Wyatt was 2 seats from Elijah. He had decided to be a named source 4 days ago, and the decision had aged on his face in a way that looked like both weight and relief at the same time. He nodded once at Elijah when he sat down. Elijah nodded back. The panel chair called the hearing to order at 9:03 a.m. The precinct's attorney went first. He was measured and organized and spoke for 18 minutes about protocol, about split-second decisions, about the inherent complexity of nighttime traffic stops, about the department's commitment to review. He used the word procedural 7 times. He did not use the word handcuffs once. Then Lena's editor, who had agreed to provide the footage directly to the panel under subpoena, nodded to the technician at the side of the room. The screen on the front wall came to life. Thomas Wyatt's footage ran from the beginning. 29 minutes. Unedited. Unbroken. The room watched Briggs reach for the door handle before the window was fully down. They watched the pull, the push, the fall. They watched Elijah's shoulder hit the wet pavement and watched him lie still with his hands open at his sides. They watched the phone skid into the puddle and stay there. They heard the voice coming from it, thin and distant. Dr. Reed. She's at 70 over 40, and they watched both officers stand within 4 feet of that sound and not move toward it. The footage continued. It showed the citation being written. It showed the name on the badge lying in the puddle, visible and legible for 11 uninterrupted minutes before anyone picked it up. It showed the moment the radio confirmed his identity, and the moment Briggs went still. It showed Elijah walking away, and Briggs watching him go, and the particular quality of that watching, which was not the watching of a man who had just corrected a mistake, but of a man calculating what the mistake was going to cost him. When the footage ended, the room was quiet in the specific way that rooms are quiet when everyone in them has just seen the same thing and is waiting to find out what it means for everyone else. The panel chair asked Briggs to take the witness seat. He sat down. He straightened his uniform jacket. He had prepared for this. You could see the preparation in the way he held his body, the controlled stillness of someone who has rehearsed stillness. He answered the first 4 questions with the same flat precision as the precinct statement. Standard protocol, inconsistent information, resolved appropriately. The 5th question was about the phone in the puddle, whether he had heard the voice coming from it, whether he understood what it was saying. Briggs paused. A short pause. Barely a second, but in a room this quiet a second is a long time. He said he had not been able to clearly make out the audio given the weather conditions and the ambient noise of the scene. The panel chair asked the technician to play the audio from the footage at the 14:22 mark. The room filled with Rosa's voice. Dr. Reed. She's at 70 over 40. Elijah, please. We're losing her. Clear, unmistakable, the rain audible beneath it, but not over it. The room stayed quiet. Then Briggs said something, not loudly, almost to himself, the way people speak when the filter between thought and language briefly fails. He said, "I didn't know who he was." He meant it as an explanation. It landed as a confession. The panel chair looked at him for a long moment. She wrote something on the paper in front of her. She did not look up when she wrote it. In the 3rd row. Elijah reached up slowly with his right hand and touched the badge on his lapel, the small watermark in the corner. He had been that badge, lying in a puddle for 11 minutes, visible and legible and entirely ignored. And now he was here, in a room full of people who had seen exactly what had happened, and the man who had done it had just explained, without meaning to, that the problem had never been a question of facts. It had been a question of who counted as a person worth knowing. Briggs was terminated 16 days after the hearing. Ferris followed. Carver resigned on a Tuesday with no statement. A criminal investigation was opened. The internal review was replaced by an independent one. No single moment reversed everything. It reversed the way it was built quietly, through paperwork, through decisions no one announced. Elijah returned to the OR on a Monday. He arrived at 6:45 a.m., scrubbed in, clipped his badge to his gown. The watermark was still in the lower left corner. He had not replaced it. He pushed through the OR door. The hands that had been pressed into wet pavement on Meridian Avenue now held a scalpel under cold white light. Same hands, different meaning. Power doesn't disappear when it's wrong. It waits to see if anyone is paying attention. Some stories don't make the front page until someone refuses to let them disappear. If this one stayed with you, that's not an accident. That's the point. Names and details are fictional. The pattern is not.